Welcome back to Dater or Excommunicator Reformed Relationship Advice with the Dating Expert. I am here, as always, your host, Micah Foster, and with me is Luke Sharping, the Dating Expert. How are you doing, Luke?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm feeling very, very dating expert-like this evening, so it should be a good recording.
Now, Luke, would you call yourself a doctor of love?
You know, some people have called me that. Some people definitely have. I don't have a degree, so
Okay.
I mean, I could be one of those doctors, you know, that just people call them like doc, like
Yeah,
like doc love or something.
exactly.
Yeah, but I'm not. I don't have official, degree to back it up. But
Yeah.
I mean, some people could say I am.
So you're a doctor of love.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, today we are gonna be referring to a real doctor, as far as I know.
Yes.
A man by the name of Dr. K. Have you ever heard of Dr. K?
I have heard of Dr. K. Yes.
And he very famously wrote a book called Shoulder to Shoulder. Have you heard of Shoulder to Shoulder?
I have heard of Shoulder to Shoulder as well. Yes.
And Shoulder to Shoulder is this famous, very famous, probably immaculately famous.
Yes, very famous.
Book on marriage, and it's a tough read. It's a
Yes.
tough book, and so because of that, we decided to bring on the show two experts.
Yes.
Now, one guy is a pure expert in this book in particular.
Yeah.
That being our guy Matt, and
Yes.
then he has kind of a co-counsel who goes by Top G, who's
Yes.
also going to be on the show today. Could you guys say hello?
Hello. Hello.
Now, which one of you is Matt and which one of you is Top G?
This is Matt. This is Tom.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, there we go.
So we got Matt and Tom on the show. Now, tell us, how did you guys become familiar with the book Shoulder to Shoulder? And how did you guys become... Now, Matt, we know you're an expert, and Top G, would you consider yourself an expert in this book as well?
Yeah, so I studied Shoulder to Shoulder back in my doctoral studies at Hart College under Chris Bird. He was my doctoral advisor, and we met on a bi-monthly basis. And yeah, so my thesis is actually published online. I just got it published, and yeah, I'm really excited about that.
And Tom?
Yeah, I decided to take the book in the whole, finish it in a week. Runs about 300 pages. Early edition probably runs about 225. And yeah, I would say I highlighted, reread, memorized a respectable amount of said book.
That's good. That's good. I think from what I've heard, that's a really good thing to do.
And tested.
Yes.
Okay, that's the best, and that's actually what we're going to get into today. So as always, we're going to do our main show. We're going to have a halftime show segment, and we're going to bring our guests into that.
Yep.
And we'll close out, if we've got time, with Bible verse of the day. So let's just jump right into Dr. K's book. Now, Matt, could you give us a little background on this book, Shoulder to Shoulder?
Sure. So this book was actually put together by Chris Bird. It was edited. It comes in 3 sections, each of which is composed of 3 sections, each of which is composed of either 2 to 3 sections. And so the book, I don't have it in front of me, but I think in the first section he goes over marriage under the aspect of creation. In the second section, marriage under the aspect of the fall. And then the third, marriage under the aspect of redemption.
Yeah. So how did Dr. K become an expert on relationships and marriage? Do you guys know kind of his background?
Yeah, that's actually a good question for Tom.
Yeah, well, I think being married definitely helps, at least entering the realm or the possibilities of expertise. I think mentoring and being pastoral, being all over the world, being able to observe things people may turn a blind eye to in relationships or just how people function. And I think just him swimming through Scripture 4 times a year, every year, for probably about 50 years or so. I don't know. I think expert on marriage is such a trite thing to say, because honestly, marriage, much like Scripture, is something that masters you. Ultimately, you find that you know nothing, and that every expectation you have is just blown into smithereens. And yeah, ultimately, the key to any sort of functional relationship is flexibility. So over time, he's edited it way too much. By the time I finished Shoulder to Shoulder, he's like, I edited it again. And I'm like, all right, you've edited this way too much.
Yeah.
So it always seems like he, as well as everyone, is in a unending loop of learning.
Now, what's your presuppositions towards this book? We'll start with Luke, the dating expert. How much do you know about this book? What's your thoughts on it, Luke?
So I've never actually read Shoulder to Shoulder, so I'm an outside perspective at this point still. But from my impressions of it so far is I think it seems like a good book on marriage. I've heard lots about it from people at the chapel, the experts we have on right now, and Micah. I've heard a lot of things about it. Some of it is a little bit more like concerning than good sometimes, especially when people bring up page 222,
which we are not doing.
We are not discussing, but I think maybe some people's attitudes have been a little warped because of that. But I mean, I haven't actually read it, but from what I can tell, it seems like it has some good advice.
Yeah, and so Matt, why don't you speak to kind of? No, you did your doctorate in this. What's kind of your presupposition coming into Shoulder to Shoulder?
I think my presupposition about the book, similarly to what Tom is saying, there is a biblical blueprint for marriage, and I think having grown up in a setting where I was not taught that from my parents or my church, it was really helpful to just see someone, again, like Tom said, who's swimming in Scripture several times a year. Reading through it, that is, several times a year, to kind of construct almost a theology of marriage. And what does God really have to say? What does He expect of us? What does He require of us? And then putting that into a system that we can, aim to live out.
Yeah, and to just to be clear, so Dr. K does not have a pool full of Bibles that he swims in.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand this right?
Yeah, I believe that is correct.
So he does not have a pool full of Bibles.
That's correct. I think they're actually just talking about reading the Scripture.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense. Thank you for clarifying that.
Now, Top G, general presuppositions or thoughts that you bring into this book?
Yeah, I think, let's see. It's going on the internet. I'm choosing my words very carefully. Most Presbyterians just come off as prudes, and I typically, when I think of like love, intense passion, emotions, marriage, whatever, commitments, Presbyterians kind of fall in the line of people who I find to not exhibit those things. So I was kind of skeptical. I'm sure thought I was just going to get a bunch of Bible verses thrown at me. Thought I was going to get the typical, well, you're on this side, she's on that side, and the closer you get to God, the closer you get to each other. But what I like about my presuppositions is, in some sense, they were right, because we all function out of our worldview, out of our presuppositions, out of our environment, out of our denomination circle, whatever. However, there were general principles and things that he connected in the book, like concepts like Trinity, relationships, I guess the concept of purpose, like why are we together? Is it just because we really, really, really like feel like being together? Just makes us feel really, really, really good. It's literally, you're supposed to reflect something of the divine in your daily engagements and interactions with one another. And there's a purpose and intent behind everything you do. And so that, to me, was very enlightening and very helpful when I began to read the book.
Yeah.
However, he is a very repetitive person,
Mm-hmm.
so I thought I was going to hear the same thing over and over again. But to my surprise, a lot of it was more recap than repetition. So it was ideas building on each other. So as you progress further into the book, all the things that you read and he sort of revisits build upon a really big picture.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And that kind of shows coming into it. You know, we've got I'd say generally positive opinions of this book.
Yeah,
and
for
so,
the most part.
And so we're gonna come in and just see what we think. Now I've chosen. Because this is a dating podcast, this isn't a marriage podcast. There's a lot about marriage in here that's good, but I've chosen to just focus on one tiny 2-page section of Dr. K's book that is entitled "Entering into a Relationship."
Yes.
And so I'm just gonna read a segment, and if I after I get done, I'm gonna ask Matt just to kind of give us an interpretation, considering he is kind of the expert on this book. So here's what it says: entering a relationship. As soon as the desire to enter into a one-to-one male-female relationship is properly present in the man, he need not be reticent about it. Is that the correct word? Reticent.
I think that's how you pronounce it.
He does not even need to wait for some encouragement on the part of the woman. In fact, he should not and may not wait for that. This already would constitute a lack of leadership to one degree or another. Once he irresponsibly fails to exercise it, chances are that he may never recapture it. No, he should take the initiative and frankly begin to talk it over and talk it out. So, Matt, what's Dr. K kind of getting at here?
Yeah, so I think what Dr. K is getting at here is, as a man, if you've been biblically informed, you understand what God expects of you in marriage, what that looks like. You've learned what to look for, qualities to look for in women around you, and you see that in a girl, in a social setting, or a friend, someone you've just met. And you say, well, okay, this is a beautiful woman. I may know her well, I may not know her well, but I see a lot of potential in our compatibility. I see that we could have this marriage that God requires of us. Or for us to each have individually, there's really no reason to not extend an invitation to explore that together. And I think what he's talking about with not waiting for encouragement from the woman, when he says encouragement, what he means is, I think maybe a better way to say what he's saying is, as the guy, you don't need to wait around for her to make the first move or for her to make it super obvious that she's into you. And that if you're the type of guy that's going to struggle with that, and you feel like, well, I don't have the confidence or I don't have the warrant to extend that invitation to her unless she's going to reach out to me first, then that pattern or that habit is going to show itself again and again in your relationship. So you don't want to start off the relationship with that habit as the first step.
Can I speak on that as well?
For sure.
Yeah, Matt nailed it on the head. But I think one thing Chris Bird told me that was helpful is the measure of a man is not when he calculates his success, when he calculates his chances of success, but at the risks he takes. And as a man, there's just some things you need to do when you do not know the outcome. No one likes rejection. No one likes being told you can't know or you can't have this. But guess what? That's life. Toughen up. You're going to experience it one way or another. And if you spend the rest of your life running away from something that could be beautiful or glorious because you're afraid of being hurt or making yourself feel like crap or whatever, then you're kind of a wiener, just in all honesty. And, that's kind of the point of David Goggins' book, You Can't Hurt Me, is to build, as a man, you need to build mental toughness. Our toughness as Christians comes from Christ. And so any extent of masculinity, it comes from me exemplifying him. But if a girl is in your realm of influence, friends or coworker or classmate, whatever, that is God sovereignly, providentially making her available to you. And that's how a Christian should see any woman that he feels could make a wonderful companion or a wife or girlfriend, whatever. I tell people not to worry about if I'm ready for marriage or if she could make a good wife. I said focus on going on a date, and after a couple of dates, focus on meditating if you're ready for a relationship. Once you're in a relationship, meditate, see if you're ready for engagement. When you're engagement, then you can worry about being married. But a lot of people, they scare themselves out of relationships because they're like, oh, I don't know if I could be married, or I don't know if I could love someone. It's like, just go on a date.
Mm-hmm.
You're overthinking it. Life is one step at a time, not a marathon at a time. And that's kind of his point, is grow a pair and make a move.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something we talk about a lot on this podcast, Luke, is that idea of just kind of taking the initiative, going after it, especially as a guy. What do you think about Dr. K's language here? He kind of uses pretty extreme, maybe superlative language here. Do you agree with it?
So, yeah, I think I agree very strongly with the principle, at the very least, that in 99% of circumstances, maybe it's a different number, but in a very large percentage of circumstances, if you're the guy, you should just go ask her. You should just go talk to her. You should go communicate that with her, because that's your responsibility. You're responsible to do that. It's not her responsibility to do that. And like Dr. K says in the book, if you start off by feeling like that's her responsibility, well, it might show a pattern for the rest of your relationship. So I agree with that. To
interrupt, a woman's beauty is God's green light. And when you say, I will stop, you're being a coward. If a woman is beautiful and she is in your realm, God is saying, go for it. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, well, I'd say that's definitely a part of it. But I think, and I agree that a lot of the time, the problem is the other direction. Like, you're too scared. Many people are too scared to go up and talk to them, or they are afraid of the consequences of their decision. Instead of just making that decision, in the moment, they focus too much on, oh, what if it doesn't happen? Where if it doesn't happen, it's going to make you a better person. It's going to make you more prepared for the next time. It'll teach you things. Like with everything in life, you have to do it in order to learn to fail, in order to grow.
Well, not only that, it teaches you to root your confidence, your manliness, your life purpose in what you know is true about yourself and what God said is true about yourself, and not how other people may perceive you or desire you. I've said no to women who were perfectly pretty, perfectly wife material. I just didn't have an internal desire to go after it. And it doesn't make them less valuable. I've had women shoot me down, and they said, I literally can't find anything wrong with you. You're fantastic in every way. I'm just not interested. And it taught me to, like, I guess in making yourself a better person, the whole purpose of rejection is God is stripping people-pleasing, man-pleasing, false identity from what naturally comes just from being born. Being born, we care about what the guy giving us a Happy Meal thinks about us. I mean, people are so big to us. That's just a thought that just crossed my mind. I felt like I had to share.
Yeah, that's good. Either way, I think I agree very heavily with the idea behind everything he's saying. I would say there's probably circumstances where it's better not to ask a girl, but those circumstances are not super common. So just thinking of the consequences, if the consequences are bad enough and you don't, and it's just a feeling in a given moment, I don't think it's not always the correct decision to ask her out. But in the vast majority of the...
No, you're overthinking it. Just go on a date, figure it out. Just go on a date, figure it out. Don't overthink it. Have fun. And that's the problem with a lot of Christian dating. It's like people try to figure out if this girl's wife material before they ask her on a date. Like, just go on a date and figure it out.
Oh no, I completely agree. I think that's something I've come to the conclusion as I've been doing this podcast is that in the vast majority of cases, going out on a first date should not mean very much.
In the right way.
In the right way. What I mean is, you shouldn't hype it up in your head. Oftentimes, I think we kind of think of going on a date as this like crazy experience, especially if people who haven't been on very many dates. But in reality, for a lot of people you go on a first date with, you don't know them very well, so you're just getting to know them on a basic level, and getting to know whether it's a person that you want to continue on in a relationship with.
Yeah.
So the first date, I think, just go for it in that sense. That just ask them out on the first date.
Yeah. Well, let's read forward and see what Dr. K maybe has to say, maybe doesn't have to say about this. Skipping down a little bit, this is Dr. K talking about asking when the guy asks the girl. He says, the bottom line is that he should first explain how and why he was attracted to her. In this, her godliness and humanity must play a central part. If immediate reaction appears to be strongly and irreversibly negative, the matter should be dropped. But if it is received well, with caution, or even with surprise, he should feel free to continue with a good deal of sensitivity, care, and clarity. His aim, once again, is to determine whether she is willing to explore with him the possible qualifications for marriage. Therefore, he should ask her this and carefully explain what this means. In the light of the requirements of Ephesians 5, would she be interested in finding out whether they could answer the qualifying questions affirmatively, whether he is cheerfully willing and able to provide longingly, lovingly, and sacrificially, edifying, sanctifying leadership totally and tenderly, and whether she is cheerfully and willing and able to submit fully and respectfully to such loving, sacrificial, and edifying and sanctifying leadership. Matt, you're the expert on this book again. There's a lot of words in that section. What's Dr. K getting at?
Yeah, so I think what Dr. K is getting, and actually you can read, this is in chapter 5 of my thesis. I briefly went over this, but what he's getting at is, so if we take just the distilled, in Paul's words, kind of the distilled formula for marriage. The husband loves, the wife respects. The question when you're dating is basically, as a guy, is this a girl that I can commit to loving? Because if I can't, then by marrying her, I'm signing up for a non-biblical, a dishonoring marriage to God. And if the woman in this scenario is thinking, well, this is a guy that I couldn't really respect, then by marrying him, she's signing up for a dishonoring marriage to God. So from the inception of the dating, even the first date, now obviously you're not going to talk about this on the first date, but as you go along through the relationship, this is going to become more of a conversation. So the degree of commitment and interest is going to dictate the degree of conversation you have about this. So to Luke's point, the first date, you're probably not going to talk about this in explicit terms, or in upfront terms. But as a guy, you're thinking, okay, do I enjoy being around her? Is she someone that contributes to the situation that I'm in a way that I would want her to be here, that I can truly love her and truly desire her to be around me and to sacrifice for her, way out in the future if we got married. And then for the girl, it would be, is this a guy that I can respect? Does he take the initiative? Does he lead well? Is he godly? Is he the type of guy that I would want as a leader of my household?
Now, let me jump in here, because to me, reading this section, Dr. K seems to be saying, hey, you should have this conversation day one. Do you think that's Dr. K's intent, and you're kind of maybe disagreeing with that idea, or do you think that's not really his intent?
Can you reread that specific sentence?
Yeah. So in the very first sentence of this thing, he's talking about just going up and, like, when you first talk to her. He says the bottom line is that he should first explain how and why he's attracted to her. In this, her godliness, So he's saying he should first explain how and why he's attracted to her. This is when in like the first conversation, and then if this immediately, depending on her response, then he goes on to kind of explain the specifics of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Dr. K might be. Well, first of all, I think I should say just preemptively, I think he's trying to avoid the girl being under the impression that, first of all, maybe he's just looking for a casual relationship, or second of all, of the girl sort of being at unrest, like, well, I don't know what his intentions are, I don't know exactly what he's thinking. Now, granted, those are sort of preemptive thoughts, and that's sort of not a way we want to operate all the time. But yeah, I think Dr. K is coming from the ideal world scenario where, you know, everybody knows what a biblical marriage looks like. Everybody studied this. Everybody's thinking about it. And so when you walk up to a girl, you know, you're on the same page. Hey, dating is, you know, we're trying to assess compatibility. And so I think he's speaking from that ideal point of view. But I will say, to answer your question, I don't think that that's always practical. I think you're gonna scare a lot of girls away.
Yeah. Well, he even speaks to that.
With that.
He speaks to that a little bit later down. He says, it also must be recognized that this approach may cause some alarm as long as it is, that it may cause some alarm as long as it is not generally practiced or understood by the Christian public. The woman may take it as a proposal of marriage or read into this. Great pains should be taken to explain that this is not at all the case.
Yeah, I feel like this approach is kind of impractical, because first of all, I think a lot of the time, if you're gonna just ask a girl out on a first date, I think you should have thought about this, but like giving a detailed list of, like, not a detailed list, but explaining like exactly why you're attracted to her, I feel like in reality most of the time it is just you're eligible, you're a Christian. And I like you. So is there really that much to explain? I feel like most of that is said just by asking her out on a date. You kind of assume I like you, and I think you're a Christian. I think you're eligible, from what I understand. But I get what he's trying to say here, but by making your intentions very clear from the beginning, though.
Another thing to consider is Dr. K is from the Netherlands, and he is Dutch.
Yes.
And let me give you an example of how Dutch people work. Let's say you're a parent, your kid comes home, and he has a stick figure of the family and the house. The house is obviously smaller than the stick figures. One arm's longer than the other. The lines aren't straight, whatever. When you're a father in America, you go, wow, this is so precious and beautiful. I'm going to put it right on the fridge for the whole family to see what an amazing artist you are. A kid comes home with the same drawing in Netherlands, Germany, whatever. Parents go, well, the line's a little crooked. The grass isn't really blue. The sky's a little bit too close to the house. Roof is crooked. That's just kind of how Dutch people work. Is they're very analytical. They're more glass half empty than half full kind of people. Just generally speaking, and they're very blunt.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is Dr. K is functioning off of the reality that men love or are attracted to women who take care of their body. Men are attracted to women who take care of their beauty. Men are attracted to women who are emotionally healthy. All that. What he's saying, I would say from shoulder to shoulder, he really hits on, I would say, is a neglected conversation to have. Personally, I think it's something tactfully you sprinkle in over time, and not something you dump in one setting. That's just not just for women, but I just think for people in general. When you dump a lot, that's very intense and requires a lot of thought and not a lot of time to really think it through, or there's not a meaningful enough relationship, or there's not communication between each other isn't quite figured out. It can just end up making things worse, or a lot of things can just get lost in translation. So I would say I agree with the principle. I think the principle is great, but culture to culture and based on dating, there is no really biblical rules for dating. dating is subject to culture, so it's just kind of going to vary. But the principle of bringing up these manners of, do you respect me, or how, do you love me, or how do you exhibit love, or what does love mean to you? How does God play a role in your life? What role does God play in your life? Or how does God change the way you view me? Or how have I become more beautiful as you've gotten to know me over time? Those are just kind of important questions to ask, like, as time goes on. It's my friend in college, and I would say, if you want to date a normal girl, do not go to Christian college. He asked the girl on the date, and she's like, "Are you gonna love and hold me forever?" And he's like, "I just wanted to go to Applebee's." And the same goes for men too. There are some very strange men, but I'm not attracted to men, so I will be talking about women.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Can I add to that real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, I think, a lot of this going back to this conversation that Dr. K is recommending we have, obviously, is case by case. So I think the level of trust and friendship that you have with a girl at the moment of the onset of the relationship, that determines a lot of what you're going to talk about. So if you don't know this girl, and what I've told a lot of guys at college is, look, you're assessing her. You know that she's assessing you, but you don't need to say that to her. Okay, so maybe after a month, maybe after a couple of months of dating, you get to know each other, build trust. Then you can talk about, hey, we need to assess each other in these specific ways. But granted, if you know the girl, hey, she's a mature Christian girl. She seems to know a lot of this already. She studied the Bible, and we have a decent friendship to begin with. Then you might be able to start things off with that more clear and outward sense of, this is an assessment. So I think, but if she doesn't know, if there's no trust there to begin with, or if there's no friendship at all, then it's going to feel very cold and impersonal, and it's going to feel purely like, well, if this is just an assessment for a job, like a job interview, then this is just not something I'm interested in. I think that's completely reasonable for her to feel that way.
Do you have some last thing to say?
Dates are not job interviews.
Yeah, it's not a job interview.
Before we go to our halftime show?
Yeah, I think part of it too, and why it doesn't make much sense to start off the conversation that way sometimes, is just because a lot of those things, especially when you're talking about like the thing, you could start off like a job interview and say, these are the things I'm looking for. But a lot of these things are things that you discover over time. And so it's best to have those conversations as they come, I think, because you're not going to learn about these things on the first or second date a lot of the time. These are things that it takes time to discover about someone else a lot of the time. So it makes a lot of sense to wait to have those discussions until it's an appropriate time where you've actually had time to get to know each other and make some assessment, at least, I think.
Yeah, and before we go on that, we do need to take our halftime show break. But before we take our halftime show break, we need to say that today's episode is sponsored by the West 40 Boys. Now, the West 40 Boys are the self-proclaimed most dangerous men on earth.
Yeah.
They gave us a large sum of money.
Sum of money. I do not have it with me, unfortunately.
It was loads of cash.
It was a large sum of cash, and I think that just goes to show how rich and successful they are.
Yeah. They're great.
They're great.
I would go follow them at the West 40 Boys on Instagram. Amazon was approaching us. DraftKings was approaching us.
Christian Mingle, we shot him down right away.
Right away. None of them had enough money.
Yeah, Elon himself gave us a call.
He did. He hit us up. He wanted to pay us. Not enough money.
West 40 Boys, yes.
West 40 Boys hooked us up.
So West and so 40. They're the best.
So we just want to thank them. Thank you again to the West 40 Boys. This week's episode turned into a two-parter, considering how expensive it was to bring Matt and Top G on the show, even with the West 40 Boys' infusion of literal mountains of cash. We had to split this up, and it is a long conversation. It is an important conversation. So if you want to hear Matt and Top G play Dater or Excommunicator for the very first time, and you want to hear the Bible verse of the day, and you want to get to that sweet, sweet exit music composed by our own Josh Brown, you'll just have to stay tuned. Come back, same bat time, same bat station next week. in the second part of this episode of Dater or Excommunicator.